All right, we are live. We are live on this Saturday morning, lovely Saturday morning here in the Okanagan, with an old friend of mine, Tristaca, used to be
Not
Caldwell.
that old.
Well, no, you're not old, but we have been friends a long
Yes.
time. We
Yeah.
used to sneak beers into high school parties together. So, I mean, we go way back.
Yeah. Yeah, totally.
Awesome though, because obviously our lives took very different paths, as me into hockey, and then you into this nutrition world, living down the street from me. And Tristica is, yeah, kind of essentially blowing up in the nutrition world. You've been everywhere, really. I mean, a lot of places, a lot of magazines, a lot of newscasts, working with sports teams and everywhere else. Just maybe give us a little bit, Trissy, about your background, if you don't mind talking about yourself, just kind of where you studied maybe and how you got into a little bit of a high profile scenario with the nutrition aspect.
Sure. So I started at the University of Victoria, and I did a degree in human kinetics and sort of really enjoyed learning about the body and movement and all of that. Looked sort of into the personal training route and athletic therapy route and sort of the next step from there, and realized that nutrition was really my passion. So I went on and did my master's at McGill, and I specialized in sports nutrition. So did a thesis around sports nutrition and have been working in sports nutrition ever since. So yeah, 14 years now. Have my practice Fueling with Food, where I do a lot of things, but one of the main things is sports nutrition. So working with a variety of athletes, whether it's sort of competitive, whether it's young, whether it's sort of WHL players, all of that. So yeah, definitely where my passion is.
Cool. And for those listening, Trissy has two boys of her own who have caught the hockey bug quite substantially, I guess. So,
oh my God, through and through, yes.
and kind of, even not that you disliked hockey, but you said your husband wasn't really a hockey player, and you neither. But all of a sudden, they're like all in.
Totally, yeah. I mean, I have always enjoyed exercise, have just never been talented enough to do team sports. So I was always like the runner and sort of that side of it. But yeah, and my husband played baseball, but just hockey for some reason has taken off in our household.
Right. That's awesome. Yeah. So they're doing the spring hockey now too, and trying to navigate the space of like what's going on, which I know a lot of us here in this group are doing. So yeah, so I thought it would be awesome to reconnect with Tristaca for everyone here listening. The world of nutrition is foreign to some, and some of us think we kind of understand it, and maybe we don't. We're obviously all trying to do our best here in our own environment, in our own way, to make sure our kids and ourselves, get the proper nutrition. And I think sometimes, trying to balance that, and what does it mean for a competition time, and at what age, and how do we handle all these things? And I just thought it'd be awesome to just chat. You're a mom, you do this professionally. You handle it in your own place, and I think it'd be very beneficial just to kind of pick your brain a little bit about maybe some helpful tips, some strategies, and to see if we can get people straightened out a little bit. So the idea here, people, and thanks everyone for joining here today. I thought this was hopefully going to be a good time. I know, Trissy, that I had quite a few people that were a little worried that they weren't going to be able to tune in live because of practices or whatever, life, but they're like, is it going to be available after? And yes, it will be available after in the Facebook group. So for those of you that are here now, the way I had it set up with Trissy is that we'll just have a conversation here for the next 30, 40 minutes. And then at the end, if there's any questions that that arise from our conversation, Tristaca said she's more than willing to answer some questions. So I'll post them on the screen, and we'll see if we can get our questions answered. And we're going to try and respect Trissy's time here and keep it within an hour. So if you're okay with that still, Trissy, then that's fine.
Totally.
Yeah, we'll rock and roll. Okay, awesome. So we talked a little bit last night, and we thought that maybe a good place to start, just because, usually for those of you listening now, like I kind of direct the conversation. I'm like, well, I don't really know where to direct this per se, because you deal with this all the time. So like, what questions do you get asked a lot? And one of the things that you said was, well, around competition. What do I eat before? What do I feed my kids before, during, or how do we get something into them after? Or is it important? So, yeah, maybe do you want to start there? Maybe like what you think this is, And if you wouldn't mind, like maybe qualify if anything does change. Like I believe there's a lot of parents in this group that have kids in that, 8 to 12 bracket. There's also lots of parents with teenagers, so if something changes from an age demographic, maybe mention it, and we'll kind of go from there.
Yeah. And I think that's a good point. So I will definitely try to qualify it. And then also just know, if I was working individually with a client, then I could actually say, here are the grams of protein. So this is exactly the amount of snack with grams of carbs and protein that would work. In sort of a group setting, I'll give, general things to think about. So if we think about the competition nutrition, so we're thinking about like maybe, game day, or we're thinking about when there's like a couple of games where we will eventually one day go back to tournaments, and we'll have those in our life again. And so trying to feed, trying to feed our kids in those scenarios. So a couple of things to think about when it comes to competition, or even just like the pregame, we're really looking for food that's going to be digested fairly quickly, because we want that food into their bloodstream so their bloodstream can use that for energy. So in general, the type of food that is digested quickly is carbohydrate. So if we think about, again, just pregame, so maybe that hour or two, we're driving to the game, we're driving to the ice, or that sort of really quick time frame just before is where we want to get some fast acting carbs. And so that could be something like a piece of fruit. If we're thinking about something that has to be packed in hockey bags, or something to like have multiple times throughout the day, like I often recommend things like applesauce pouches, or those Sunripe bars that are basically just fruit, but they're in sort of a compact, easily eaten format. As soon as we start to obviously everybody's a little bit individual, but generally, again, in that sort of 30 to 60 minutes prior to activity, mostly just carbohydrate. As we're moving further, so as we have more time, is now where we want to include some good protein and some good fat. And so one of the things that I often talk about really with my athletes of any age is what I call the athlete plate. So if you were going to assemble your food on a plate and thinking about like the proportion of different things that are there, that might vary based on the day. And again, kids sort of 8 maybe to 12 are probably micromanaging it a little less as they become more interested in nutrition and really are able to understand how their eating impacts their performance. Maybe they are micromanaging it a little bit, but if we're thinking about that plate and we're thinking about a competition day, or maybe even the day before, if you break that plate up into basically thirds, so a third of it's going to be sort of protein, a third of it might be like your fruits or vegetables, and a third of it's going to be carbohydrates. So let's talk, rice, potato, pasta, quinoa, those sorts of things. As we get to heavier competition, that sort of carb portion actually moves up to about a half. And then we're at sort of like the quarter for the protein and a quarter for the veg. So the biggest variation as we get to competition is more carbohydrates. So just getting it into them more frequently. I often tell athletes if they're, heading somewhere such as a tournament, to just fill their hockey bag with a bunch of snacks so that they can have something just before, even if they're having something so when we're talking about what to have right after the game, we want to get some good protein into them. So, trail mix is always a good option, or I don't know, like cheese strings if you have them, or like, those little pepperoni or Greek yogurts or things like that we can sort of repair the muscle work that's just happened.
Mm-hmm. As I was thinking there, I couldn't help but go back to when I was playing, and I know as a professional is much different than a 9-year-old playing in an Atom tournament. But just for my own kind of curiosity, like usually the pregame meal for professional teams is around 1 o'clock for a 7 o'clock game.
Yeah.
And you load up, you eat big, and you go back to your bed, and usually most guys have a nap, and then you get up and you start your pre-game routine. And for me, that would involve probably something after that, like an apple or something right on the way to the rig. But I, for one, didn't like having feel like I had food in my stomach, right? Like I wanted to have that done and taken care of. Is that first part of that question is that what you would recommend for like a higher level, like junior age? Is that a good window there, like to eat that far before competition?
Like what you just outlined?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess there's ideal, and then there's also sort of what happens in real life, right? So yeah, you're probably not going to at that point eat another big meal by the time you get to the rink, but you're also going to be at the rink and you're not just playing the game at 7, like you're warming up, you're doing all that other stuff. So I, at that point, would recommend, if possible, that people have, again, would you have fruit? Would you even do something like a sports drink? Would you do a juice, like something that's a bit liquid? I get the idea of not wanting a lot in your stomach. Mm. The idea, though, like from a physiological perspective, if we think about that food, that energy entering your bloodstream at 1 o'clock, like it's completely out of your stomach by 3, 4 o'clock for sure. There's like your blood glucose now is starting to drop. Your amino acids in your bloodstream have started to drop. Like there's not a lot of energy left in your bloodstream by the time you get on the ice. So really trying to keep it topped up with little amounts of food, liquid, like for a lot of my athletes that don't want to eat, or maybe they have a bit of a nervous stomach, then we're talking about things like smoothies, or again, just juices or sports drinks to get some energy in.
Gotcha. No, perfect. And then the one thing I'll just add for my own personal experience is that when I was younger, it was always like massive amounts of pasta.
Yeah.
And almost nothing else. I mean, like, and I know that that's definitely evolved, but in some houses it hasn't. Like, so as a Spokane chief, let's say, it was like before a game, we'd go to the spaghetti factory and it would be spaghetti and probably tomato sauce, not even meat sauce. Right. And then you would be off. Right. So that evolved. Then I started getting like some proteins in there. So then they would have like chicken maybe and some pasta. And then like towards the end of my career, which I thought worked the best for me, was instituting those, like the micronutrients, like having steamed spinach or having a salad be a portion, or broccoli or whatever. I just felt that for me and my body, that worked the best. So, I mean, you talking about that athlete's plate there, and incorporating some of those things. If there's anybody out there that doesn't think that you need to have like anything green or any type of vegetable, I would challenge that for you and give it a try, because I think for me, it actually worked. I felt my performance change.
Totally. And when I'm talking to my own kids, when I'm talking to sort of my younger athletes, I always talk about function. I think like our role as parents, our role as hockey coaches, whatever the case may be, is really to prepare these kids to be the best athlete that they can be, which happens through training. It happens through the mental training, but it also happens through learning how to feed themselves. And so, oftentimes when I'm going to like work with teams, let's say we're sort of, 10 to 12-year-olds, and I'll have that athlete plate up on the overhead, and I'll say, okay, so there's the fruits and veggies. So why do we need veggies? And there's like silence, like, kids often don't know why they should have veggies on their plate. They just know that they should. So I really encourage parents to talk function. So in the case, again, of that athlete plate, if we're thinking about the fruit and vegetable component, that's where all the antioxidants are. So if we think about that soreness that we can get after workouts, that's inflammation. We need those antioxidants to move that inflammation out so that we're not sore. And obviously, you're going to use age-appropriate language when talking to your kids about it, but that's the point of that, is to help your body recover really quickly so you can work out again at the next day. It also helps with fiber, so it helps with keeping our gut healthy so that we're not getting stomach aches as often. And then sort of, again, shifting to the other portions on the athlete plate, thinking about protein. I think we all know, kids often know that that's important for strength. The other thing that protein plays a really big role in, which is kind of important right now, is immunity. So one of the signs of sort of protein deficiency, particularly in athletes, is that they start to get sick more often. Once they're sick, it sort of hangs on and they can't get rid of it. So that protein is really important for that. And then, of course, the carbohydrate is what energizes them. So just having that conversation with kids about what the function is, sometimes there's a better buy-in.
Yeah, no, exactly. I loved, good. The why matters, I think, I've seen it even in hockey and drills, when you're talking about, the subjects that I like, character and perseverance and some of these things, like when you tell them the why, then all of a sudden they take over ownership, a different type of ownership, a different level of ownership over what they're all about. So no, I love that you're talking about that. When we're talking about, we talked about carbs. And so I know my kids, and I'm sure they're not alone, carbs seem easy. And they are easy a lot of times. A lot of times they come in a box. A lot of times, they come packaged up. Sometimes for whatever reason, the apple sitting in the fruit bin isn't what they want to go for. And they want to go for, the shreddies in the pantry.
Yep.
Is this a concern for parents? Like, is this like, how do you direct that traffic when it comes to the consumption of carbs and maybe being a little higher ratio than they should be?
Yeah, fair enough. And I think, just to highlight, I think even as adults, like carbs are everywhere, right? They're in the fruit. Like if we think about that athlete plate, they're in the fruit and veggie category, but they're also they're in the pantry. They're what's quick and easy to get. And so while they're important, we sort of again talked about that athlete plate, like that carbohydrate is what provides the most energy. With that energy, you also want to get nutrients. So the idea of like sugar actually does provide energy. It's why it's in sports drinks. It doesn't provide any other nutrients. So where possible, we'd like to choose something that also has some other nutrition there. So again, that idea that you gave, like the shreddies versus the apple. Yeah, kids, especially this age, like I find like between 12 and 15 is where kids can start to actually choose foods based on like what they want to get out of it. Really, under that kid or below that age, kids just choose food based on what tastes good. And it's really hard for us to, as adults, to sometimes see those decisions. Yeah. But again, having these conversations, my kids are 6 and 8, and I will always have the conversation about your body needs a variety of food in order to function. It actually can't just live off of broccoli. So it's not even necessarily healthy versus not healthy. It's that your your diet needs lots of color. So that plate should have lots of color, not just one color. And if we're thinking about the fruits and vegetables, from an adult perspective, they have lots of B vitamins. Those B vitamins are what allow our body to use like the puzzle pieces of the carbs, the protein. They sort of put those puzzle pieces into the right spot. Mm-hmm. So without those vegetables, your body just can't utilize the carbs and the protein as efficiently.
Gotcha. As you were saying that, I was just thinking about the shreddies, and then actually thinking of a conversation I had with the boys just the other day, because in our house, we're not huge dairy consumers, and it's not really a conscious choice other than I'm like lactose intolerant and one of my boys is. So it's just kind of, that's the way it goes. Yep. But we do have milk in the house usually, and usually it's always whole milk. And with that in mind, a bowl of shreddies with whole milk, yep. Is that now like fulfilling a little rounder spectrum?
Yeah, I don't have a problem with that. I actually think that might be a good sort of breakfast to have because it's nice and quick before you're heading off to the rink. So it actually, that is actually fairly nutrient dense.
Right.
But again, in the same way that our body can't live off of just broccoli, that can't be the only thing that we're going to throughout the day. There has to be lots of variety. There has to be lots of color. I would encourage, can we throw any fruit on it? Can we cut up some fruit salad on the side? Can we eat that and then maybe eat a banana on the way to the rink? Just other ways of, again, just trying to get all the components of the athlete plate.
Sure. Now I'm thinking of juices. Usually, and again, it's just our family, usually we don't have juice in the house. And I'm really not sure why, other than we just kind of got them used to water. So water is usually the drink of choice. Lately, I've been bringing some pineapple juice in the house that's, pure pineapple juice, not from concentrate. Is there how do you navigate the label reading and that aspect of, sugar intake and what type of sugar, and maybe even just navigate that space, what the difference between an apple and apple juice? And do you think there's any difference? Should we worry? Does it matter?
Yeah, great. So there's lots of questions in there. So let's just talk sort of like the fruit versus the juice. I'm very similar. I don't have juice in the house, and especially at my kids' age, I don't think it's necessary. I think from an athlete perspective, I mentioned it earlier in the sense that the benefit of juice really is just the convenience. So we talked about when you're at the rink for hours prior to a game and you don't want a lot of food in your stomach, that seems like a really good place to maybe let's have a juice there. Outside of that, I would if we're just sort of home having breakfast or watching TV or whatever the case may be, I would love the kids to have whole food. As soon as you take it and you put it into a juice, you're generally losing a lot of the fiber, so a lot of the pulp that's there. So that is also where those B vitamins are, those B vitamins that help our body use the carbs, the proteins, and the fats more efficiently. So it's definitely not as nutrient dense as the fruit. I'm also not saying no family should ever have juice in their house. But just understand that there may be a time and a place for it, but it shouldn't be our go-to. I don't think it should be sort of a regular consumption kind of thing.
Gotcha. So the package from nature is the best delivery method, really.
100%. Yeah. Whole food,
Right.
for sure.
Yeah.
And then even just sort of coming back to, like, I think the other question that was layered in there was about sugar,
Mhm.
because sugar is everywhere. The one thing I'll say about sugar, and this might come as a surprise to people to hear coming from a dietitian, is I don't think sugar in and of itself is the evil of the world, in the sense that I don't think that we have to worry about minute amounts of sugars in, let's say, a condiment that we're using. I don't think that that's significant. I don't think that just because our diet is low in sugar that it's nutrient dense. Nutrition is much more nuanced than just like one thing being the problem. So for example, when we eat yogurt in our house, like I buy flavored yogurts both for myself and for my kids because I like it better, and it has sugar, and I'm okay with that because you're getting lots of nutrients for that sugar. I certainly don't stock my pantry with a ton of candy and all of these other things that have tons of sugar but no nutrition. But I'm definitely, when there is nutrition involved, I don't think we have to make sure that there's zero sugar associated with that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, for sure, for sure. I think the one thing I found just within the four walls of our home is when you're aware, I guess, when you're more conscious of what has sugar in it and how that really changes the profile. Because a lot of times you'll buy something, you don't even really think that there's sugar there, right? And so when you do start making conscious choices of what has sugar, what doesn't, I believe our palate changes. I think mine has. So like my sensitivity to sugar is way higher now. So I also think that helps in saying that my own personal ability to consume vegetables and enjoy them.
Yeah. 100%.
You know what I mean? Because like there's nothing that has to happen to it. Like when we're so overstimulated with sugar, like these things do become like they seem tasteless and they seem. So I've noticed that with my kids, and I've noticed it. So I don't know if that's just experiential or if you've noticed that as well. But I think that's helped our vegetable intake as a family.
Yes. And that, like, again, there's a physiological reason for that in terms of the taste receptors on our tongue, similar to salt, right? If you get the more sugar that you eat, the higher your threshold goes. And so you need more sugar to actually perceive that something's sweet. And it's the same thing with salt, right? If we start salting all of our food, it eventually doesn't taste salty. And if we want it to taste salty, we have to put even more sodium or more salt on it. So that totally makes sense. And again, I think if we think about sort of trying to make sure that when we are getting sugar that we're getting a lot of nutrients for it, then perhaps that's a bit better. The other thing that I also say too, where possible, is trying to pair something that's going to have more sugar generally has more carbs and less protein. So just trying to pair that carbohydrate with a protein, just again, it helps decrease how fast that gets absorbed into our bloodstream. It helps keep those energy levels a bit more consistent. I think as parents, we have all seen what happens when kids have a ton of sugar in terms of behavior, like birthday parties and all of that. So, and the other sort of quick thing, sorry, Jason, to mention, it just in terms of that label, one of the tricky things in Canada is that we don't differentiate between naturally occurring sugar and added sugar. So again, if we take the example of like a yogurt, what's on the label in terms of grams of sugar, that's also going to include the lactose that's found in the sugar, which is obviously not the same as table sugar. So looking at the grams of sugar isn't always the best way of knowing how much sugar is in something. Certainly looking at the ingredient list for added sugar is the best way of knowing.
Since we're on that topic, and it has been, I mean, it's been kind of hot in my opinion for almost a decade now, and that is the sugar thing. And thank you for pointing out that maybe it isn't the ultimate poison that it's pointed out to be, but there is some ambiguity around that, and maybe just like, in a 2-minute answer, because I know you could probably talk for hours about it, but like the difference between the naturally occurring sugar and the refined sugar that gets added, and because do you think it's different? Like, do you know it's different? How is it different? And just, I don't know, just maybe a summary of what that difference is.
Yeah, so I'll try to keep it to 2 minutes, which you probably
don't have to.
Answers are not generally 2 minutes, but so yeah, naturally occurring sugars would be like the things like lactose and fructose. I mean, there's galactose, there's some other things, but those are the ones that we recognize. They actually have to get, when we eat them, they get digested into our bloodstream, and they actually have to travel to the liver, and then the liver will convert them to glucose if it needs it, or if it's coming in big excess. So I always give the illustration, like, when cherry season comes about, I will eat bowls and bowls of cherries at a time, and there's only fructose there, but my body, because there's so much coming in, will convert that to glucose, which is the blood glucose sort of raise that causes insulin secretions. So that's the major difference, that those naturally, so the lactose, the fructose, don't impact blood glucose levels. And that blood glucose level is sort of the big thing that is the cause of all the negative that we hear about sugar, like all of the perhaps negative consequences. So that's a big thing. The added sugars would be things like maltodextrose, dextrose, sucrose. It usually has like a OSE at the end of it in an ingredient list. And those are the ones that don't necessarily have nutrition associated with them. Those are the ones that, cause insulin secretions. And particularly as we get older, our body becomes less responsive to that insulin. And so things like, diabetes can happen, and all of those other things that I think we as adults know.
Okay.
I think just the tricky thing is, it's not the full story, right? Like, it's what else is in that food. And is a little bit of sugar helpful if there's also, in the case of yogurt, a bunch of protein, a bunch of B12, a bunch of B6, a bunch of calcium, and vitamin D.
Right. Yep. Fair enough. Gotcha. So again, we're here live with Tristaca Curley, who knows her stuff, has been doing it for a long time, and has worked with sports teams in particular, loves working with athletes, loves working individually. That's really your sweet spot. You've said you like being in front of people and work with them and really understand what their wants and needs are. So one, appreciate you coming out here today. And two, just a reminder that for you guys watching, that there will be a Q&A here at the end. If you do have something as we go, by all means, don't feel like you're bombarding us. If I think it's relevant to the subject, then I'll put it up on the screen, and Trisha, you can respond to it now. But yeah, we want this to be an open forum, because I know my questions might not be your questions. So we'll try and keep it interactive like that. Moving on to, I wrote down picky eaters, and this is maybe a little bit of a blindside for you, because I know we didn't talk about this beforehand, but I know that there is a lot out there. I don't know if it's this day and age or if it's kids in particular or whatever, but there's definitely picky eaters. I will tell one story from my house. Gunner, who, if anyone's met Gunner, he's very willful and spirited. And at a young age, you could tell that he was quite picky. And my personal strategy with this was like from 3, kind of 4. And I'm sure you're going to like shake your head and think I'm an idiot and probably shouldn't have done it. But we would stay at the table until like he would finish what was on his plate. It ended up being allowed to have 3 things that he doesn't want to eat. And that's still to this day, like he's allowed to have 3 things. But like, I'm talking, this would be like 2 hours, I think was the maximum, right? Like where he would not do it. Like he's like that forceful that he's not doing it. He'd go to the front door, he'd come back, and I would just sit there, hey man, we can do this all night, right? But this is the way we go. And the only reason I guess I'm saying that, it seemed to have worked in the sense that like he understands the principle that he can't just eat whatever he wants whenever he wants, right? Like, so we did come to an agreement, like I said, with the 3 things. Sometimes he rotates those 3 things depending on the season. We're not firm and hard with it, but for me, I'm saying that because I want to hear if you think that's okay. And 2, maybe it'll give some parents some hope, because like, I know that there's some kids out there that like just refuse to eat anything. And I think like the world revolves around these kids for things that they want to eat. So anyways, that's, what do you do with picky eaters? How do parents handle these guys?
Yeah. So like, first of all, I'll say, I will offer sort of what I think is a good approach, but again, like Jason, if it worked for you, then that's, like, for parents out there, parents know best, and whatever works for you is important. A couple of the things, again, I don't know if I can keep this to 2 minutes, but
your time.
Yeah. So when it comes to picky eating, I guess what I always get parents to do is think about the long game. So I think it's really easy to get caught up, myself included, in the moment of, oh my God, all he ate was carbs this meal. And I'm saying he because I have 2 boys, or like he didn't eat any vegetables today. It's really easy to get caught up in this moment of, oh my God, you have to finish everything on your plate before you get up. I encourage parents, and this is hard for myself too, to think about the long game and think about, what's the relationship with food that we want these kids to have? Do we want them to actually, when they're not around us, like when they're at play dates, when they're young, when they get older and they move off to college, or they're like living with billets, or like eventually they're going to be left to their own devices with food. We want them to have a good relationship with food, know how to feed themselves well. So one thing that I think is really helpful is I identify roles for the parents and for the kids, if you will. So for the parents, it's our job to decide when kids eat. So I'm a really big believer in defined meal and snack times, meaning that kids don't just graze all day. If kids are grazing all day, like eating every hour, they're not actually really getting hungry. And as adults, if we're not really hungry, like we will only eat the stuff that's really good, right? Like if I'm more hungry, there's more chance I'm going to eat the salad and all of those other things that are there because I'm hungry. If I'm not really hungry, I'm not going to eat the salad, but I might eat the cheesecake. Like it's sort of natural, right? So making sure that we're leaving 2 to 3 hours between meals and snacks, I think is a big one. So parents, we decide when food is, and we decide what is offered. So it's snack time. Here are your 3 options. Or, what would you like for a snack? And then I, as the parent, get to decide, sure, you can have that, but we're also going to have some protein with it, or whatever the case may be. So you decide when and what is offered. And that's sort of where our role ends. And then it's up to the kids to decide what they're going to eat out of what's offered, if at all. So again, coming back to like, if there's only 3 things that, and this happens, right? Like kids say, oh, I don't like that. And so we as parents get really caught up with, well, he needs to eat. He can't go to bed without food. And so, okay, I'll just make him a peanut butter and jam sandwich because that's what I know he'll eat. But he will never then eat the meal that's offered because he knows that he can just have his favorite. So trying to make sure on the table that there's something, I talk about making sure that there's something familiar. So something that it might not be your child's favorite, but something that you know that they'll eat. So the pressure's kind of off. They could eat that. Allow them to dish up. That's another thing that like sort of serving family style, allowing kids to put stuff on their plate. That it sounds silly, but that's like a big one for kids to just feel in control. And if they don't want to eat what's offered, like this is what's offered tonight for supper, just so you know, if you choose not to eat, that's okay, but we won't eat again until breakfast.
And that's the firm one, right?
Yes. Yeah. So I think that one's a tricky one sometimes for parents because when kids then say they're hungry, what do we do? And so you have options in that moment. Do you say, take out the supper again and say, okay, well, supper is still, I can reheat this for you. Do you stick firm and say, well, I did say that the kitchen's closed? I personally did that route of sort of the one time of, okay, well, I'll reheat supper. But again, tomorrow when I say supper, like supper's over. So I'll reheat it tonight. And then the next night it's, sorry. It only takes a couple of times and then kids will realize, mom and dad mean business. This is my option. They're more likely to try things. But then if they choose not to, or if they choose to just have the carb that's there, whatever, then it's up to them. And then that's where you use that opportunity to say, so you didn't feel like having the chicken tonight. What was it about the chicken that you didn't feel brave enough to try? Is there something I can do to the chicken that you would like it more? So I always tell this story, and this sounds like it's going to be a magical solution and you're going to learn so much about your kids. This is in the past 3 years, probably the only time that this really, really worked. But when it comes to salmon, I'm a really big believer in fish and seafood being important. And my kids didn't really like fish. And so I did that same strategy. Like, you don't really like the salmon tonight. Like, what could I do to make this better? And my oldest, who was probably 4 at the time, said, oh, I'd eat it if it had aioli on it. I was like, okay, done. I will get aioli out of the fridge. Here you go. And then for 6 months, that's how he ate his salmon, which of course I would have never thought of putting those two together. But just that idea of engaging in conversation. So it's less about pressure and it's more about like, how can we make this work for you? Sometimes you learn some really good things.
Yeah, cool. No, I like that. And I think for me, and back to like the approach I took at like a really young age, I was a bit aware. I wouldn't say hyper aware, but like I didn't want the association to be like, I hate food now because dad's making me do this. But it was the consistency, right? I'm like, okay, if I'm going to do this, I can't just do it once.
Totally.
I got to make sure that he knows I'm serious, right? And I was like, and I think that's the hard part, right? Because life gets in the way, things run short, and when you say something, you really got to mean it and you got to follow through. And I think what worked for us, and maybe again, it's just totally maybe a personality thing, but is that expectation. Like the expectation is that you eat what's there, right? And within reason, like there might be an option or two that you can leave off, but that's the expectation. I think that was like my biggest thing is like, this is what is expected. And you need to understand this is what is expected because it's hard. I mean, it's hard living the alternative, as you know, and I'm sure you have people come through your door. And I do think that Gunnar, I mean, I used his name already, but like he has a better association with food, because if he was left to his own devices, he'd be one of those kids that would eat 3 things.
Yeah, exactly.
For sure. I know that, you know?
Yep. And I think that, like, good for you for being consistent and holding to it, because that's the tricky part, right? Is when, and I find that, like, more often than not, picky eaters tend to be more of the strong-willed kids. Like, that's just, they take that stance in other areas of their life. They're of course going to take it with food. Yeah. But had you given in and say, okay, well, you know, Gunnar, what do you want to eat? I'll make it. Like, you would have been doing that every single night.
Yeah. And then again, you know, our family, right? There's 3 boys here. There's 5 kids. You know, Sarah doesn't necessarily love being in the kitchen. I don't mind it, but she's usually the one who's doing it. Like, who wants to make 4 different meals or 3 different meals? I mean, that's unmanageable, right? So anyways, just from a lifestyle choice too, I'm like, we're not going down this road, and it seems to have worked out. We have a great question, actually, which I think we were kind of going to get to, but I'll use it now as maybe a great segue, and I'll put it on the screen here. It's a big one. For a higher level hockey player that might have a couple ice times a day, team workout in the gym, etc., do you have any strategies around how you can make sure you are getting the calorie intake that they need to make sure they have the fuel they need and the essential proteins and such, so they're gaining the weight and muscle mass they're trying to put on? It seems very hard to intake that many calories each day. I will say, just on a personal level, I had massive issues with this too. You know, we're growing, right? We're tall. We want to be heavier as hockey players. We want to be stronger. We don't want to be tall and skinny. But yet you're doing so much activity that it's really hard to catch up. How do you recommend that, other than just taking food like it's your job? And that's really, I mean, that's how I really took it. I'm like, this is my job. Like, I need to eat even when I don't want to eat, and I have to eat a lot. But what do you say to that?
Well, you know what, Jason, that is the conversation that I have, is like, in much the same way that you're doing training and you're putting all this attention to it. If this is an area that you realize you're not getting enough protein, you want to get stronger, you want to, of course, I would assume that this is also a kid who's growing. And so we want to maximize the energy that's available during growth. We have to put attention to it. So just recognizing that we can't sort of just, it often doesn't work to just sort of wait until we're hungry to eat in this scenario, because we're working out at such a high intensity that, plus they have school, like they're so busy that they sometimes don't even realize how hungry they are. So it becomes really a timing thing. So things that I would say is, where possible, try to eat every couple of hours in this scenario. Make sure that every time we eat, we're eating carbs with protein outside of perhaps right prior to activity, just because protein will slow down digestion. But for the most part, we're getting lots of really good carbs and protein every time they eat. You know, choosing sort of like nutrient dense, smaller volumes of food. So for example, like if we think about that athlete plate again, there might be like a smaller portion that's vegetables. Like, we don't want to sort of have a heaping plate of salad and then still try to get in the carbs and protein that we need for this particular individual. We would probably choose like lots of protein, some carbs, and then like a smaller thing of vegetables. Making sure that we're choosing things like nuts, seeds, like those are nut butters. Like, they're really small volume, so they're easy to eat when you're not super hungry.
Yeah, and they're forgotten about, right? I think they're forgotten about. Like, and I think they're amazing. Like nuts in general, and seeds too. I love both of them, and they're so nutrient dense. Like, they're high in fats, they're high in protein. Usually, like that natural packaging that they have, like with the seeds, right? Like, helps slow absorption. Like, I think those should be in every pantry for sure.
100%. Along with those things like energy balls, right? Because they're just another variation. Basically, they're really portable. In this sort of scenario, I often tell parents, like, make sure that we have snacks with us, because you know there becomes an age where we're sort of just the taxi driver to all of their different sporting engagements. So making sure every time you pick them up that there's a snack, like not missing an opportunity to eat, because it might be 2 hours by the time you pick them up, you drive them home, you get home, you make supper. Well, that's a spot where we should have put a snack in there. So make sure that you have snacks with you all the time in your car. Make sure you have snacks all the time with you in your hockey bag. Eating every 2 hours, trying to get that protein in.
All right. One of the things, when I was working with a few clients this summer, and of course I'm not a dietitian, but I'm working on them to try and find solutions to whatever things they want to do, right? And so a lot of these players were trying to put on weight, as we're talking about right now. One of the things I suggested was, because teenagers love 2 things, hockey and sleep, for the most part that I work with, was the idea of like starting your day and like being really like intentional about that. You know what I mean? So you're talking about having the snacks. When we're talking about a teenager, like I am of the mindset that if you can get support from mom or dad, awesome. But this should be you.
Yeah.
Like this should be you. Like, what does your week look like? How do you start your day? Get up half an hour earlier, have that breakfast that you want. Like that, you know what I mean? Like starting to think as like a professional, really, I guess, you know what I mean? Like try to think like a professional. What does Sidney Crosby do in his off season? Like it's not hit or miss. Like he knows exactly what's going on, you know? And I think when these kids start taking some ownership of that, and again, some of my clients were starting to get up, they'd prepare their meal. They would have something prepped on Sunday, which one of the things that was two of my guys did. And they would have their stuff during the week, right? So they would have it ready to go when it's not an in the moment decision. We all know what the in the moment decisions do, right? So how do you feel about that? Like kind of taking a little bit of ownership, and at what age do you think it's appropriate?
Yeah, I think I 100% believe that. And sort of, you know, circling back to what I had mentioned earlier, but we're trying to raise kids in this scenario, hockey players that know how to like be the best athlete that they can be, which means that mental training, it means that physical training, but it also means fueling themselves. So yes, I huge believer in that. And then in order for them to do that, so to come to your question, at what age, like it starts now. It starts as soon as they can understand food, and it starts teaching them the function of food, so that they sort of same thing. They understand like why there's different things on their plate, why their diet's a different color, why do we need protein when we eat carbohydrate, so that when they're 12, 13, 14, they can actually start to put these pieces together. And then it becomes sort of more of a planning thing, but they already understand why they need these different things. The other thing sort of along that lines that I encourage clients or parents to do too is, and I do it, is when, I mean, there's going to be times where you're going to suggest kids have a snack and they're not going to want it, or they're going to have eaten something else, right? Like it's not going to always be perfect. But if you ever notice the impact it has, so if you notice that they decided to play instead of having a snack and they went straight to hockey practice and then they're slugging it, like point it out, say, hey, it didn't seem like you were as energized tonight. Like, do you think it's because maybe you didn't have a snack? And help make those connections for them. Right. When they have that lived experience, like my almost 9-year-old will, believe me, it's not perfect, but there are moments where he actually starts to understand that. Like if I don't eat a good snack or a good meal before I go, I'm not going to play as well.
Right. Yeah, no, those are the light bulb moments. And I love when they get involved, right? And you talk about being the best athlete. Like the word I use a lot is like empowering them to be accountable. You know, right? Like it's one thing to want it, and like everyone in the dressing room will raise their hand who wants to be the best hockey they can be. Like they'll put their hand up, but they have no idea what that means, right? And I'm even talking like 16, 17-year-olds, right? So when you give them the pieces and the ability to start making some of these decisions, of course, they're not going to be perfect, but just the idea that they have some control over that aspect allows them to feel way different about how they're operating and how they're interacting with their sport, with their life, you know, with their choices. And I think that's a big one. You were talking about that, and I was thinking about meal prep and like when this age would happen. Like, isn't that an amazing way to actually introduce the kids to the process of the food creation too, and like getting them involved in that and how it works? Like I would assume you'd be an advocate for that.
100%. Yep. So, you know, and it, again, coming back to like the picky eating thing, another element that I do with that is I have like a plan. So what we're going to have for the week. I mean, I with work, with family, with all these things, I don't know how we get through a week feeding our family well without knowing in advance what it's going to be. So plan for me is crucial, but just allowing the kids to be able to see what's coming up for supper. So we can like, if it's going to be something they don't like, they know earlier in the day, they can like have their meltdown earlier in the day, as opposed to when we sit down at supper and it's just, I hate this, right? We've all been there. So that plan I think is important.
The pre-tantrum. I love that. The pre-tantrum.
Yeah, totally. Front load the tantrum.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think is helpful is also for them to see like, tonight's chicken stir fry. It's not your favorite, but this is something that mom and dad like. But tomorrow night I'll make tacos, or I'll make spaghetti, or whatever those more kid-friendly things are. Yeah. I find that there's a bit more of a buy-in when they can recognize like, okay, that makes sense. So someone else's turn to choose tonight, but I still get something that I like tomorrow. Right. And then start to include them. I think, I don't know if it's happening now more than when we were young, but I do think that there's a lot of kids who sort of leave for university and don't know how to cook. And so I'm a really big believer in getting them involved in the kitchen early. And like they can start really young. They can do stuff. They can set the table. Like energy balls was sort of the first introduction I had for my kids, because even when I remember my littlest being in like those bumbo chairs or whatever they used to have. I don't even know if those are around anymore, but with energy balls, like they can get their hands in and they can lick it right away. You don't have to wait for the food to be done. Like there's no raw eggs or anything in it, right? Like just get the kids involved. When they're also part of making things or like chopping up the vegetables, there's a bigger chance that they're going to eat it. They just feel more in control. There's more ownership of that meal.
Yeah. No,
so yes, I love it. A long answer.
No, that's great. I love it. We have another question here, which is great because I had it on my list too, and it's in as far as like getting those calories, right? And it says, do you have any advice on using protein supplements and things like mass gainers or pre-workout drinks like BCAA, etc.? And the follow-up was that, are those things harmful for a teenager's body versus natural foods? Great question. Thanks for asking it. What do you have to say about that, Trissy?
Yeah. Okay. So let's sort of take, because a lot of these things are different. So let's talk sort of protein supplements / mass gainers at the same time. And we're talking now in relation to teenagers. There's nothing quote unquote harmful about those things. Protein supplements, mass gainers, they provide some sort of nutrition in a very convenient form. Of course, we know that what they'll have is, like in the case of protein powders, they have the protein. They don't have the other nutrients that might be found in food protein. They don't have B12, they don't have B6, they don't have iron, they don't have zinc. So one thing that I often say to parents and athletes is, it's fine if you need that at a convenient time, like it's something that mom or dad is putting in water and picking you up so that you can have it there. But when you have time to make food, let's choose whole food so that you're getting those nutrients. So again, coming back to those puzzle pieces, like the protein powder will provide the puzzle piece for muscle mass, but it's not going to have all the B vitamins that need those puzzle pieces to go into the right spot for muscle mass. So long story short, I think they're okay, but let's really limit them to where we need them for the convenience. When it comes to pre-workouts, those are a little different, because so many of my clients will tell me, we'll meet together and I'll sort of go through their supplements and they'll say, I'm taking a pre-workout. Oh, okay. What's in your pre-workout? No idea. And like no, all pre-workouts are different. Like they could have caffeine, they could have creatine, they could have like all sorts of different things in them. So let's sort of look at what we're talking about. If we're looking at BCAAs particularly, the whole reason why BCAAs really came out was because Gatorade was popular prior to something like BioSteel. People didn't like the idea of having sugar. And so BCAAs, which are their branching amino acids, they're basically what they are amino acids, proteins that your body can convert to sugar. So, I mean, you either just take the sugar in, or you take in the amino acids that your body's going to produce to sugar, or produce into sugar. From a performance point of view, BCAAs are best used during. So it might be something you put in your water bottle and you're having it during a practice, or you're having it during a game. It's going to provide some quick energy on the ice, in the gym, wherever you are. It's not necessarily any better than, let's say, a Gatorade. Remembering that if we're doing something during a game, during a practice, sometimes there's a need for electrolytes, and generally the BCAAs tend to be fairly low in electrolytes. So again, thinking of something like a Gatorade has, fairly high levels of sodium, fairly high levels of potassium. And again, we're talking about a teenager. So not necessarily, I'm not saying that 8 and 12-year-olds need tons of electrolytes, but a teenage body who has, very close to an adult body is going to lose a lot of sodium in their sweat. So pre-workouts know what's in it. While I actually am a big fan of creatine for older audiences, depending on the age of this teenager, it's usually sort of late teens where I would recommend that. So I think know whether there's creatine in it, know whether there's caffeine in it, know what the pre-workout is about.
Gotcha. Is there, talking about harmful now versus natural foods, like some of these supplements are, more organic or plant-based or whatever that may be, I guess it's just being careful consumer, correct? When it comes to that, like whether these things are manufactured, machined, or where they come from, the sources. And do you have any favorite sources for protein?
I do. So from a protein point of view, I happen to be a big, my two favorite are whey and collagen. And just a sort of a pure whey, pure collagen. So the things about protein powders, plant-based, they're fine. They're not absorbed as much. And generally, again, when I feel like when we're having a protein supplement, it would probably be ideal that you're going to absorb the most amount of it. There is some concern in the plant-based protein powders that they have higher levels of lead and arsenic from the soil in which those, like the peas or whatever, are grown in. So that's something to be mindful of. Also in protein powders, there's generally not just one ingredient, right? There's tons of ingredients. So there's usually some things that allow it to mix in water well. There's usually some sort of sweetener, whether it's sugar or stevia or whatever the case may be, which again, I don't love those. So if you're asking my favorite protein powders, it would be like just a pure whey or a pure collagen. Collagen is what I use, although I'm not a hockey player trying to put on mass. But why I like collagen is there's some really good research about it helping with muscle growth, but also tendon and ligament growth. And particularly for my, like, again, sort of 14, 15, 16-year-old hockey players, they're trying to build mass, but they're also growing at a really high rate. And so we want to make sure that with that muscle growth, we're also getting strong tendons and ligaments, so they're decreasing risk of injury.
Perfect. One of the things I've been doing for the last couple of years is doing my own bone broth with organic beef bones.
Yeah.
Because of the collagen and it's supposed to be the micronutrients. And I mean, I'm not super well read in it, but it sounds like it's almost like nature's elixir. Some people think it's amazing. Like, is that's kind of the same deal, right? I mean, as far as from a collagen scenario.
It is, although like in terms of the amount of collagen you get from a bone broth, it's really variable, and you have to generally drink liters of it a day to get the same amount as you would from, like, collagen is basically dehydrated bone broth, right? Like, it's just the sort of the collagen dehydrated. So what's considered the effective dose? So meaning what in research, how much do we have to have in order for research to show us a benefit? It's 10 grams per day. So if you're doing a typical collagen supplement, it's 2 tablespoons. So again, yeah, bone broth, awesome. It's just hard to say how much collagen you get from that.
Gotcha. My wife's been using collagen supplements, and she's noticed from, like, I guess it's a human perspective, but maybe more important to females, like her hair and her skin and her nails seem to be a lot stronger and stuff. So anyway, she's a big advocate for collagen as well. For the female listeners out there. Taylor Wilson asks about plant-based. You did talk about it a little bit. Do you have an overall opinion on plant-based or not plant-based, or each to their own? What's your story?
Yeah, I think well-planned plant-based diets are really healthy and really they can offer a ton of health benefits. I don't think one has to be plant-based to get those benefits. So for example, if we're trying to decipher what is the absolute best diet for everybody, like, I think there's a lot of research behind the Mediterranean diet, which isn't plant-based, includes tons of plant-based proteins, but also includes things like fish and seafood. So I think that's equally as good. The tricky part, I think, with plant-based is the majority of clients, now granted, these are the ones that are seeking out my services, but the majority of plant-based clients that I see are not getting the right nutrients. So in order for us to get what we need off of a plant-based diet, we have to be having daily consumption of things like tofu, what we call pulses, so like black beans, chickpeas, lentils. If you and or your kids don't like having those daily, it's going to be impossible to get the nutrients you need off of a plant-based diet.
Right. One thing I will say, which I coach and which I teach, is the element of, like, curiosity. And when it applies to diet, like, I think that you need to be really curious and aware of how you function, and I mean, again, this is age appropriate, of course, but I found, like, that I wasn't at a younger age, right? So I was just eating, and in the case why I think this is relevant is because I was trying to put on weight. I remember one time in particular, the Los Angeles Kings wanted me to be a big, heavy third line winger, right? And they're like, "You're going to fill this role, and we want you to train appropriately for it." So they told me 215 pounds. Usually I played at 200, right? So that was 15 pounds more than I was normally playing at. And that required a hell of a lot of eating and a hell of a lot of calorie consumption and required me to lift differently. Long story short, I was on whole milk and whey protein the entire time. And bloated, gassy. At the time, like, I was 20 years old. That's 25 years ago. It was kind of a funny locker room joke, to be honest. You know what I mean? Like, I was just the stinky guy, right? But I've become, like, now I get the fact that that's not normal, and you want to run clean, right? Like, now, like, it's kind of funny. Like, I never fart anymore, right? Because like I know what works with my body and I feel way better because of it. So yes, I could squat 445 pounds, and yes, I could bench 275, and I was 215 pounds and 8% body fat, but I was not quick, right? I wasn't at my highest performance because of what I was putting in my body. And I didn't even really know that I was kind of poisoning myself. So anyways, in saying that, right, like I know that you speak to that too, right? We have these strategies and these ideas, but like some foods just don't work well for people, right? And you need to understand what those are.
Yeah, 100%. And I think like that's such a good illustration though of even just what often happens for teenagers, for adults, is like that weight, right? Like, so you were looking at, okay, what do I need to do to get to that weight? And so that was sort of like the focus, the lens through which you saw everything. But like, let's also talk about what happens at that weight. Like, how do we get that weight to be the functional weight for you? How do we get you to feel really energized? So getting all of your micronutrients at that. How do we get you to be well hydrated at that? Like, just the whole idea that the scale isn't the only way of measuring how good you're feeding yourself, right? Like, it's also how you felt.
Yeah. Well, I guess I should say, I mean, I turned out I didn't know anything about even being lactose intolerant. Like I could eat chicken all day long. I can eat steak all day long. It makes me feel fine. Like seafood too, like big seafood fan, but like dairy in that way, like whey particular. And then with the whole milk on top of it, like a double whammy. Like I had, tons of mucus, like I was coughing things up. I mean, it was bloated, like all this stuff. So
it impacted your breathing, your VO2 max out on the ice, right?
Yeah, it was everything, right? So I mean, so even in that window, like some people really do function well on plant-based proteins, right? Some people really function well on animal-based. Some people function well on dairy, right? Like I do think like that's where I get into the curiosity aspect, like what proteins work for you, like what type of natural packaging works for your body type. Because I've experienced for sure, and I've seen it in others too, that like people function to higher levels of energy with different stuff.
Yeah. 100%. Yeah. Right.
So we have one more question here, and I think I know the answer to this, but I'll let you handle it. Do you need to worry about any of these supplements having anything in them that may show up in a test when you get to the level that it may become an issue, like playing in the WHO?
Yeah, you do. But like protein powders are notorious for having contamination, so sort of accidental presence of banned substances. So there are, when you get to this level that testing becomes part of your training, then there are certain brands that have third-party, like Sport Assurance, it's called. Like there's Informed Choice. There's a couple of third-party testing companies, and so you'll see it on the actual supplement. So it'll say Informed Choice or a couple of the other ones. I can't remember what they're called at this time, but they are guaranteed to not have any of the banned substances in them. So yes, anytime and that goes all the way down to vitamins too. At the point where you're now potentially tested, you have to be careful of all of that.
Yeah, I know, and it blows my mind in this day and age that professional athletes are like, oh, I wasn't sure what was in it. Like, wow, really? Like, I mean, that is totally like the responsibility is on the athlete at that point. And and if you're not sure, then don't use it. I remember we were tested for the first time over in Germany. There was random tests, and you had to, it was your livelihood, right? I mean, like if you want to be suspended, don't care about what you eat. If you want to take, go dot to dot, then make sure you know what's in there. And like you said, there is some third parties because it is an unregulated industry for the most part. Like that's what's really scary about it. But some do take that extra measure, right, and pay for the what's it called, like the certification of like from a third base place.
Yes.
Good to know.
Yeah, so they're more expensive, and the label will be on it. Like it'll say Sport Safe or whatever the case may be.
Right. Yeah. Cool. Well, we're almost at the hour. I think maybe the final one that I had on my list is the multivitamin aspect. When we get into the micronutrients and that type of stuff, is it okay? Is it okay? What's your thoughts on giving some of these young athletes multivitamins?
Yeah. So again, just remembering that this is, I don't know any of the athletes that are on this call. So this is going to be very general information. If I were working with a client one-on-one, I can give them very specific recommendations, but this is for sort of general audience out there. There are definitely some supplements that I think are beneficial for both a growth perspective as well as for a performance perspective. So a couple of the things to really be mindful of, I'm not saying that you guys should go out and supplement, because if you're already adequate, you don't need to supplement. But nutrients to be mindful of, particularly in this sort of demographic, is iron. So iron is something that's really important during growth. It's, for all of us, I think we know that fatigue that's associated with low iron, but when kids are developing lots of mass, they actually have really, really high needs for iron, and iron is really poorly absorbed. So that's one of the things that I really look over with my clients. I often will send my clients to go get blood work to see where their iron levels are. I do need to say, don't ever supplement with iron unless you know that you're low, because it also can be toxic. So just because I'm saying iron's important, don't go get an iron supplement for your kids, but really make sure that they're eating a lot of iron. See a dietitian if you have any questions about that. Other ones that are important, calcium and vitamin D. Again, they're these high growth periods in their life. Calcium and vitamin D are really, really important for bone development, but again, really important for muscle, tendon, ligaments, so sort of all of the architecture of the body that allows us to grow. Another thing that's really important for I work a lot with athletes is omega-3. So omega-3 does a lot of things in the body. It helps with inflammation. It helps with your body's production of human growth hormone. But there's in the past sort of 2 to 3 years, there's been some really good research on omega-3, especially from a supplement point of view. So higher dose omega-3 supplementation, helping prevent TBIs or concussions like brain injury. So like the NCAA, for example, is requiring all of their athletes to be on an omega-3 supplement because of the protective aspect of it. So that's, again, something that's really important to look at. So yes, I think there are some supplements that could be warranted, and some nutrients to definitely be really mindful that your kids are getting enough of.
Awesome. Yeah, that's a great point. Obviously, brain injury and trauma and concussions have really taken a forefront in a lot of sports.
Yes.
And anything we can do to help prevent that. Our game's a contact game, right? Like no matter what they're going to try and do, you're going to get banged around, so if we can do anything that's preventative for that, that's really amazing advice. One thing, so we're at the hour, where can we find you, Tristy? And yeah, where can we get more of you? How can we work with you? What does that all look like?
Yeah, so I think there's probably going to be a link maybe, or you could post my website link. That's the best way to get a hold of me. You can either email me there, you can book a session directly with me. A lot of health plans do cover dietitian visits, so coverage is also possible for a lot of clients. Basically, because I'm in private practice, it's really easy. You just book an appointment with me and then we can work together. I have always, but now I'm doing 100% virtual work, obviously. So it doesn't matter where you live in Canada. That's not an issue.
Yeah. Lots of people from the States down here too. You're pro-American, I assume, as well.
Definitely. Absolutely. I'll work with you from wherever you are.
Yeah, perfect. And you said that maybe you'd be giving the members of the group here maybe a little discount or something. Is that true?
Yeah. So anybody who decides that they want to work with me, I will offer 25% off of all of my services.
Oh, wow, that's awesome.
Yeah, so have a look at my webpage. Again, you can book with me. You can look at the different packages that I have, and I would love to work, individually.
That's awesome. One thing I will say that we did through Tristaca was, I don't even know what's the right name to call that. The identify your gene, or like, what was the name of that thing?
The genetic testing.
Yeah, the genetic testing. So it was. I'll just maybe explain, if you have a second, I'll just maybe explain it from mine, and then you can add on it, because I thought it was really beneficial. So like all it is like a spit test, essentially. You send this in, Tristaca grabs it, they send it off, and they analyze the genes associated with your body type and what that means from a nutritional level, right? Like, do you absorb iron, like you said? Like, is that something that maybe you don't absorb well? How do you, it's a laundry list of stuff that's really easy to consume though from the consumer. Like, and you have like almost like a letter grade type system on where you at for each member of your family. So like we found out from that Gunner's also lactose intolerant. We found out that, you find out all these really cool things. And then for people who are into high performance, I think it's invaluable. Anyways, what can you maybe do a little better job of explaining that than I just did?
I think you did a great job of explaining it. Yeah, it allows us, like, again, we're looking at genes. So these are things that don't change. So yeah, for your kids, like whatever we find out about them now, those are the genes they're going to have for the rest of their life. And we find out how we can tailor different foods, different types of supplements potentially based on their genes. And so, yeah, it looks at a bunch of different nutrients like the vitamin D, B12, looks at omega-3. It looks at sort of how your body does off of carbs versus protein. Sort of the end of the report also looks at sort of as an athlete, sort of fast twitch versus slow twitch, how you are in terms of recovery. And it really allows us to have that inside edge on personalizing your diet.
Yeah, I think that was, really cool. And I would, of course, I would recommend anyone working with you, anyone has any questions, you can provide a ton of benefit. But like what I liked with that was, it was like, I still have it like 7 feet away, right? I can look at that, like what the report was like, and none of that changes, whether they're 8 or whether they're 18, right? Like those genes are the same genes. So like it's something they can take with them. And it was relatively inexpensive. Like, do you remember, like, what are you charging for that now? What is that? Just so people understand.
Yeah, so the whole package was $495, which included sort of 3 sessions plus the kit plus the report.
Right. Yeah. So like, that's amazing. I thought it was invaluable. I would definitely recommend it. Again, we were helped out with a part of it from a healthcare package. I know everyone doesn't have the same insurance packages, but if you are a young family and you want to know, I think it's awesome. If you are getting into the junior levels, you're trying to, become a hockey player, I think it's a no-brainer, really. I think it's almost like a must-do. So anyway, someone like Trista would love to help you out with that. And I think it probably serves as a pretty good backdrop for all the other discussions you can have. Right now, you're starting to tailor some of these meal plans and some of this idea off of that added information. So just thought I'd throw that in there, because like a lot of people I don't think are familiar with that, and the ease of it too, right? I mean, like there's nothing you do. You just spit in a little test tube thing, and then all of a sudden you get this awesome amount of information back. So I really like that. So anyways, that I guess wraps us up. Thanks so much, Tristy. You were amazing as always, just a wealth of knowledge. And I know those listening now and after will get a ton of value from it. So I appreciate you spending your weekend with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Hey, no problem. So yeah, I'll post that later for everyone. I'll post Tristy's link. I think that we'll figure something out, so if somebody calls you, like to get the 25% or whatever, like somehow we'll figure that out.
Only people in this group are going to know. So just, when you email me your book, just let me know and I'll do that.
Okay, awesome. All right, well, have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks again. This sounds awesome. We'll definitely check it out. Oh yeah, great, Jarrett. So definitely check out your website. So I'm sure, again, we've worked with Tristy before. You got an all-star, first-star gold medalist here to work with. She knows what she's doing, and she's great at what she does. So definitely recommend Tristy's services, and have a great weekend, everybody. Thanks so much for being here.
Thank you.